Welcome to the first episode of the Cancer Letter podcast in the headlines. How are you doing today, Paul? I see you have the beautiful bookshelves behind you. You're in Vermont, right?
I am. It's beautiful here. It's snowing.
Yeah.
Skiing has been great at Trapp Family Lodge. They're not our sponsor, but let's name them.
Oh, I'm jealous. Being in Boston proper, there's not quite many opportunities for skiing, but hope to escape next weekend maybe. I heard there's more snow coming, but
Sledding.
True, I did sled this weekend actually, so that was fun. First time maybe ever. I don't know if I've done that as a child, but so I'll take us through sort of what we went through the issue this week. This week, NCI and other government agencies, FDA, CDC, were scrambling to make their websites comply with President Trump's executive orders, basically trying to eliminate all traces of DEI, health equity, and gender. So we had a coverage of that was really incredible by our director of operations, Katie Goldberg. She put together not a complete but a quite comprehensive table of websites that were taken down, including grants that their web pages are taken down as well. So if you're concerned about the status of your grants web page, you can definitely check out that really great table that Katie put together. We also had a story about the Senate Finance Committee advancing RFK Jr. to the next level, the next step in his confirmation, his likely confirmation. We had a great guest editorial by former NCI Director Cameron Rathmel on the importance of communication, especially in the light of the communication ban from the government agencies. And then we had some guest editorials from a variety of, or about a variety of topics. We had the LLS former CSO talk about the history of the field as he retires from his position, and also a great guest editorial about improving accessibility of cancer clinical trials. Our In the Archives this week was another incredible feat by our director of operations, Katie Goldberg, where she found one of the basically an oral history that was taken down in the website Purge from the lead story and highlighted it. And definitely worth checking out. That's a wonderful profile of Marsha Henderson and her incredible career. So,
To me, one of the most interesting things that happens in the government is when people try very hard to comply with orders. And in this case, I don't know if they went too far because the times have never been like this, but one of the things that they've done at FDA was get rid of oral histories. So now getting rid of oral histories has a name. It's erasure. And what was the name of, let's talk about the person whose oral history they've erased.
Yeah, Marsha Henderson. She was the former FDA Associate Commissioner of Women's Health, and she had an incredible career. Henderson is a Washington, D.C. native, and she grew up in a middle-class Black neighborhood shortly after the city was desegregated. The oral history that she had on FDA's website was taken right as her retirement from FDA was imminent, I believe, or she had just retired, one of the two.
Well, yeah, I was there when women's health research was becoming a priority for the United States government. I wonder if it means that women's health research is no longer a priority.
Well, that's the issue with the websites is that, we understand that DEI and gender are, not priorities of the government, maybe even a harsher set of words can be said for that. But especially for the grants and some of the other websites, the fate of the website doesn't necessarily correlate to the fate of the actual grant or the actual program. So it's yet to be seen exactly how that's going to play out.
Well, which is why I'm so happy that we have the Cancer History Project, because when history is being erased in one place, it can pop up in another. So history does have a way of being preserved. So, Jacquelyn, I think we should probably switch to the stories
report
that happened just as we pushed the publish button last week.
Yep. The special report came out yesterday about the indirect costs, the proposed cap on indirect costs. Paul, please take it away. This is...
So we finished the issue, and I was returning calls. So I called this friend, and we're talking. It's about around probably 4:15 Friday. And then she says, "Oh, shit." And I say, "Huh?" As one should. And he said, "Well, they've just dropped the indirect costs down to 15%. And I said, "Oh, shit." And then, I think a lot of people had a very busy weekend. I think this is an issue that does not just involve NIH.
Yeah.
This is an issue that involves all of research for science. In fact, when you look at that NIH document that they published, the guidance, it just says grants, but it really probably also includes cooperative agreements and also contracts. So that's where it's going, and it's not just NIH. No, it's probably going to be DOE. It's probably going to be every agency you can think of. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is potentially. I mean, the federal judge in Massachusetts is trying to stop this from happening, or at least delay it, right? But the way it was written is that the indirect costs can be dropped even retroactively on existing contracts, correct?
Well, you'd need to kind of get rid of the laws of the United States, a lot of them. I don't know if that's a problem at this point, but given the current legal climate, this is not one of the mysteries of law. This is something that could be resolved by a very smart middle school civics student. Yeah. So, no, you can't do that. Will they do that? Who knows? So among those busy people this weekend were the lawyers in the 22 attorneys general's offices who by Monday morning filed an injunction, requested an injunction, and very quickly on Monday the judge said, the judge basically granted the injunction, and it's going to be in court on February 21st. It's worth looking at that. Then at the same time, also on Monday, the organizations representing universities as well as 13 research universities filed a suit. Now, it's probably, I hate to call anything a no-brainer, but I already have. But we can sort of guess what the judge is going to say, but what we can't guess is what the administration is going to do. It seems that some of the other of its actions are being challenged in court as well, and statements are being made, really hints by Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, that perhaps the administration doesn't need to worry about judicial review, which actually goes back to the foundations of the United States. Marbury versus Madison. I learned my civics well when I was in middle school. So we've got problems, folks. It's also really clear that this is something, indirect costs. Should we go back to just this talking about indirect costs for a little bit?
What exactly are indirect costs, Paul?
Indirect costs are the costs that are negotiated usually by a grant, the institution receiving a grant or a contract or a cooperative agreement. And those institutions basically negotiate with the government over what their costs are, what their actual costs are. This structure goes back to 1940, to the war effort. So literally 1940. So this issue is 85 years old. So, but it's also a part of the functioning of the government and the academia that is extremely difficult for people to understand and analyze. It's also not been an issue on which the government has wanted to talk very much. It's kind of like something you don't talk about in polite company. And this, by the way, is not the first time even Trump pays attention to this, because in the 2017 budget, I believe, in the first budget that budget proposal he submitted, the proposal was to pay no more than 10% of indirect costs. And at that time, really everybody who cares for NIH, and by the way, this is really interesting, because the rates were also, was not something that they wanted to apply to the Department of Defense, which was also interesting. But at that time, the Friends of NIH and Friends of Research, overall, Friends of Science, organized and defeated that piece of that proposal. And what happened next is every year the appropriations bills since have been saying you cannot go back and reverse and renegotiate. Now, this is interesting because these rates are very varied. Some of them, for some institutions, they're fairly low, maybe 28% or something. So for them, this will be not a huge hit. And for others, it can go above 60%, 80%. I mean, particularly vulnerable are the basic science centers, or most of them. So those can go into the 80s and 90s percentage. So on top of it. So basically, the government gives you $1 million. It also gives you indirect costs. And in 1940, by the way, indirect costs were 50%.
Wow. So what does this mean for cancer centers and cancer research if indirect costs are capped at 15%?
I think that's a doomsday scenario for most institutions, for many institutions, or at least that's what they're saying. But that said, discussion of the subject is something that's actually good for everyone. It's the reason this is such a mystery is that people have been saying, oh, don't talk about direct costs. Well, you create a secret and then something like this happens. But it is understandable, it's very opaque that somebody would come up with this idea. Now here, the argument is very interesting, that the same institutions accept lower indirect costs from private foundations, such as, say, the Gates Foundation. They keep mentioning that. And that's true. Or the American Cancer Society. And many institutions, actually, some institutions do not accept those grants because they're going to be losing money. The reason some of these institutions, there are two fallacies here. One of them is that some of the calculations of indirect costs that the government uses are different from the calculations that, say, the American Cancer Society or Gates Foundation uses. And in fact, some of these include some of the same costs, except they're direct costs. So you kind of have to recalculate all this. The other part that's also interesting is that the reason these organizations can accept lower indirect costs from private foundations is that they're getting fairly reimbursed by the government. So those are the two possibilities. Now, how do you oppose this? It's interesting that the only attorneys general that joined the suit come from the blue states. the red states really need to be involved in this somehow, because guess what? Red states have a lot of research.
Yeah.
A lot. And they're. I haven't done a comparison. I haven't seen anybody do a comparison, but a lot of people are now. A lot of the organizations are preparing to oppose this, and that means some grassroots work now in primarily red states.
Wow.
Now, if you have a university in your city, surely jobs depend on this.
Yeah.
If you strangle research, well, those young investigators aren't going to go and buy a pizza or buy a house. Mm-hmm. or beer, which is actually important for young investigators, despite what the healthcare establishment says. Yeah. It's a story actually we're working on, but probably won't publish anytime soon because of Trump and the transition. So maybe 4 years before we look at that. It seemed like such a big deal,
I
right?
know.
Jacquelyn almost has a story to go on this.
I know the story's basically ready to go, and I would love people to know what I know about it, but there's too much news. News.
The title is something like, "Can I have a beer tonight?"
Yep.
So anyway,
tonight?
You can have a beer tonight. You probably need a beer tonight.
Yeah.
And it seems like last weekend, lots of people were in need of a beer, but probably couldn't have one because they were working too hard.
Yep. Needed full faculties. Yeah.
Literally, in both sense of the word. So, it's to be continued in ways that are fundamental and constitutional. The courts are going to be involved, and probably the most, I don't know how effective lobbying is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting idea. In your story, you have Kimon Rathmel, Ned Sharpless, Wafik El-Diri, all saying that, what you just said, the fact that we do need to address indirect costs as a topic, but just doing it so abruptly, as Wafik El-Diri said, on Friday evening is maybe not the best way to go about it. So definitely an interesting thing to...
You have to think about it, but also Ned said something really interesting, which is that given a choice between more RO1s and more shiny buildings, most researchers would say more RO1s, but I'm not so sure that that's the choice being presented here. It's not going to be more RO1s, or at least maybe that's something that to be discussed. So, but then again, also there's a question that every dean in America and college president is asking is, where do we put these researchers? Should they get RO1s?
Yeah.
So I don't know. But it is a ton of money. It is a pile of money that a lot of people are looking at, and a lot of people should be looking at.
Yeah, for sure.
Just don't do it with an axe. Don't use an axe after you've looked. You think about it.
Yeah.
Don't think about the health of Americans and research.
Yeah, absolutely. Ned Sharpless, of course, being Norman Sharpless, former director of NCI. And
indeed.
Yes. And we're just getting news now that the doctors group was granted its motion for its temporary restraining order on the HHS agencies taking down web pages. So HHS agencies have to restore old versions of their websites by 11:59 p.m. tonight. So live update on tonight being Tuesday. So that's a live update as we're recording this podcast on Tuesday at around noon. An absolutely fascinating update.
This just in.
Yeah.
But it's also really interesting and dystopian to some extent to think about. Here's somebody who is diligently getting rid of history, getting rid of recommendations that had been thought through, and then now they may need to restore what they had taken down. I hope they kept copies. If not,
I think they archived them.
We have them. They can come to the cancer letter, and we will be very happy to work with them.
Well, copies.
Yeah.
Copies legally must be kept. They must be archived. But yes, we have backups if needed.
Yes. This is spoken by the Luddite in chief, me.
Well, thank God we have Katie.
Indeed.
All right. Well, this was a great wrap up. Anything else you want to talk about this week or the special report, Paul?
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure there will be a lot more to talk about by Friday and by next week. The news is coming in fast. So definitely.
It's a great time to be a reporter.
Thank you for listening, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Thank you.